What if I told you that Europe as we know it, its kingdoms, its cultures, even its languages, might never have existed in the same way, if not for a handful of twists of fate? Imagine a world where the Mongol horsemen, the most feared warriors of the 13th century, didn't just ravage Eastern Europe but pressed on, toppling Paris, storming London, crushing Rome beneath their hooves. What would Europe have looked like under Mongol rule? Would the Renaissance have happened? Would Christianity have survived? And what kind of world would we live in today if the Mongols had forged a Eurasian empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic coast? This is not just a thought experiment, it's a journey into one of the greatest what-ifs in history. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we'll explore the scenario of the Mongols conquering all of Europe. We'll unravel the strategies that made it possible, the fragile states that might have fallen, the cultural fusions that could have emerged, and the long-term global consequences of a truly Mongol Europe. And if you're new here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more immersive journeys into history's most fascinating turning points. Part 1. Setting the stage. The Mongols at Europe's door. In the early 1240s, the Mongols had already proven themselves as unstoppable. They had carved out the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen, stretching across Asia. Their armies, disciplined, ruthless, and fast, had destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, crushed the Persians, and obliterated the might of Kievan Rus. By 1241, they were in Europe. Cities like Krakow, Kiev, and Budapest burned. At the Battle of Liegnitz, a combined force of Poles, Germans, and Templars was annihilated. The Battle of Mohi saw the Kingdom of Hungary devastated in a single campaign. Europe trembled. Yet then, just as quickly as they appeared, the Mongols retreated. Why? The sudden death of Ögedei Khan in 1241 forced their princes back to Mongolia to elect a new great Khan. Europe had been saved not by strength, but by pure chance. But what if Ögedei hadn't died? Or what if the Mongol commanders had ignored the summons and pressed west? Europe was fractured, feudal, and unprepared. The papacy feuded with kings. France and England were locked in rivalries. The Holy Roman Empire was decentralized. In short, Europe was ripe for conquest. Part 2. Could the Mongols have conquered Europe? Let's address the first big myth. Europe was too mountainous and forested for the Mongols. While it's true that Mongol cavalry excelled on open steppes, they adapted remarkably well to different terrains. They fought in the mountains of Afghanistan, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and even the deserts of the Middle East. Logistics were their greatest strength. They created mobile supply chains, lived off the land, and used conquered peoples as engineers and labor. Europe's fragmented armies would have been no match for Mongol mobility and strategy. Remember, the Mongols didn't just win battles, they annihilated armies. They used feigned retreats, encirclements, and superior intelligence gathering through scouts and spies. Medieval knights, bound by honor and rigid tactics, were predictable prey. Fun fact, at Mohi, Mongol engineers built portable pontoon bridges and used smokescreens to confuse Hungarian forces. This wasn't just brute force, it was cutting-edge military science for its time. So yes, the Mongols could have conquered Europe step by step, kingdom by kingdom. Part 3. The Fall of Christendom. If the Mongols pressed west, the first great victim would likely have been the Holy Roman Empire. Decentralized and divided, it lacked the unity to resist. Paris, the jewel of France, might have fallen within years. England, across the Channel, may have held out longer, but Mongol naval allies, perhaps from conquered Venice or Genoa, could have ferried troops across. The Catholic Church, which wielded enormous power, would have faced a crisis unlike any in history. The Pope himself might have been forced to flee or bend the knee. Christianity wouldn't vanish, but it would have been humbled, perhaps reduced to a tolerated faith under Mongol overlords. Remember, the Mongols were not religious zealots. They tolerated Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, so long as subjects paid tribute and obeyed. But the idea of a Christian-dominated Europe, that would have ended. Part 4. Daily life in Mongol Europe. So what would life have looked like for ordinary Europeans under Mongol rule? Here's the surprising part. It might not have been the unending nightmare we imagine. The Mongols were brutal conquerors, yes, but also pragmatic rulers. Once resistance was crushed, they preferred order, trade, and tribute. Cities that surrendered were often spared. Those that resisted were destroyed as warnings. Mongol administrators relied on local elites to manage populations, so feudal lords might have survived, albeit as vassals. The Mongol postal system, the Yam, could have connected Paris to Beijing with unprecedented speed. Trade routes would have exploded. A unified Eurasian superhighway would have linked Europe directly to China, India, and Persia. Spices, silk, gunpowder, and paper might have flowed into Europe centuries earlier. Imagine the Renaissance not in the 15th century, but in the 13th. Fun fact, the Mongols were among the first to experiment with paper money. Europe might have skipped centuries of coin-based economies and leapt straight into a monetary revolution. Part 5. Winners and losers. In this alternate Europe, some groups would thrive while others would collapse. Winners. Merchants. Trade across Eurasia would enrich European cities. Venice and Genoa, instead of fearing Mongol conquest, might have become key trade hubs. Scientists and scholars, knowledge from China, printing, medicine, astronomy, would flood into Europe centuries earlier. Religious minorities. The Mongols were surprisingly tolerant compared to Christian rulers. Jews and Muslims in Europe might have experienced less persecution. Losers. The papacy. Stripped of political power, it might never dominate Europe's politics again. Knights and feudal lords. Mongols despised heavy cavalry warfare. Feudal aristocracy could lose military prestige. National monarchies, France, England, and Spain, would never form as we know them. Part 6. The global consequences. Here's where things get really interesting, because a Mongol Europe changes not just Europe, but the world. 1. The Renaissance happens earlier. With knowledge flowing from China, the Arab world, and India, Europe's intellectual awakening might start 200 years early. Imagine Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1200 instead of 1452. 2. No age of exploration. Why would Europe seek new trade routes to Asia if Asia was already open? Columbus might never sail west. America might remain unknown to Europeans for centuries, or discovered by Chinese or Mongol-backed expeditions instead. 3. Slower rise of nation-states. Unified under Mongol overlords, the idea of independent European kingdoms may never develop. The modern concept of nationalism could be delayed by centuries. 4. Global superpower shift. A Mongol Eurasia dominates trade, science, and culture. Europe doesn't colonize the world, the Mongol Empire does. The Americas, Africa, and beyond might be explored under banners of the Great Khan. Part 7. Could the Mongols hold it all? Here's the catch. Conquering is one thing, ruling another. Historically, the Mongol Empire fractured quickly after Genghis Khan. Internal rivalries, succession disputes, and sheer geography strained unity. Even if they conquered Europe, holding it long-term would have been nearly impossible without adaptation. But if they managed to establish stable dynasties, like the Yuan in China or the Ilkhanate in Persia, Europe might have become a permanent Mongolized region. Languages would blend, cultures would fuse. Europe as we know it, shaped by Rome, Christianity, and nation-states, would be unrecognizable. Part 8. Myth busting the Mongols. Before we wrap up, let's bust a few myths. Myth. The Mongols were just savage barbarians. Reality. They were masterful organizers, skilled in siege warfare, diplomacy, and administration. Myth. Europe was too advanced to fall. Reality. In the 13th century, Europe lagged behind China and the Islamic world in science, medicine, and urbanization. The Mongols had crushed far more advanced states. Myth. The Black Death would have stopped them. Reality. Ironically, the Black Death spread along Mongol trade routes. If anything, a unified Mongol Eurasia might have accelerated or reshaped the pandemic's impact. So, what if the Mongols had conquered all of Europe? We might live in a world where the Great Khan's legacy defines not just Asia, but the entire globe. A world where Europe's identity, its faith, its nations, its renaissance, either comes early in new forms or never comes at all. A world where America was discovered not by Columbus, but by Mongol fleets. History turned on a knife's edge in 1241. The sudden death of a distant emperor spared Europe from conquest. Sometimes, the fate of civilizations hangs on the smallest of chances. But perhaps the biggest lesson is this: the Mongols were not simply destroyers. They were also connectors, bridging continents, accelerating trade, and shaping the very modern world we live in. And that's the power of history's great what-ifs. They remind us how fragile our present truly is. If you enjoyed this deep dive into alternate history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more explorations of the past's hidden corners and untold possibilities. Thanks for watching, and until next time, ride with the storm of history.